Now we are going to talk about the details of the situation. Journalist Javed Rana is joining us once again to discuss the latest updates from the Middle East. Javed, thank you so much for joining us here on A News as always. Let's start with the ceasefire agreement because this is something that we are talking about quite a lot. So the Israel-Hamas ceasefire and today's exchange of prisoners and hostages. How sustainable do you believe this peace will be, and what mechanisms are in place to ensure that this fragile peace does not lead to further escalations?
Well, I think the entire Middle East is in a slippery mode. We don't know at what particular time Israel would come up and would say, make a claim, a false claim that the Hamas has breached the ceasefire and they're going to resume war. So that sense of uncertainty continues to linger on the skies of the Middle East. That is a problematic area. But now the bigger question that we have raised, that what is the mechanism through which this ceasefire could possibly be sustained? Now, apparently, going by what is written on the paper, that only suggests that these are the mediators, which include Egypt, which include Qatar and USA. Will they be able to ensure that this ceasefire is fully implemented, not only by the Hamas side, but also more particularly by the apartheid state of Israel, which has been finding somehow or the other justifications to resume war once all prisoners of war, Israeli prisoners of war, are handed back to Tel Aviv. So in that broader context, I think let's forget about the role of Qatar and Egypt so far as the influence on apartheid state Israel is concerned. It is going to be the role of the USA. That is going to be extremely important. I think it was the then president-elect, now he's the president, Donald Trump, who had used his clout onto the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, because of which ceasefire happened. That's quite simple. Because right from the day one, I think Donald Trump has been saying to Netanyahu, look, we can resume the so-called Ibrahim Accord, through which let the rest of the Arab countries and the Muslim states, let them normalize ties with Israel. So let's find another path. Because somehow or the other, Donald Trump's reputation is that he's somebody who's perceived to be a showman. He wants to let the world that he's a peacemaker, and I think that is just part of the reason. But behind the scene, we should not forget that Donald Trump has been pursuing a very hardline evangelical agenda, a religious theological agenda, under which he is going out of the way to help Israel, not only in terms of military, but military supply lines, the military hardwares and the weapons, also diplomatically. And if you look at his cabinet, a significant number of his cabinet members, they are straight away, they speak the language of Netanyahu, they speak the language of so-called far-right Israeli allies of the Netanyahu. I believe, as a matter of fact, these are all fascist religious agenda that Netanyahu, along with his allies, have been pursuing. So in a broader context, we have to understand and see the reality on the ground, that it is a combination of evangelical Christians with those of Zionist, hardline Jews who are pursuing a very hardline extremist Nazi agenda. Zionism and Nazism basically these are the synonymous. They pursue the same agenda. Under Nazism, Hitler had massacred Jews in the Germany in the World War II. In a similar fashion, Zionists, they have pursued a hardliner, so-called quote-unquote biblical agenda, and they have been killing, massacring, and ethnic cleansing a Palestinian since 1948 onwards. What we have seen during last 1.5 years, that is just a glimpse of what Palestinian has been facing at the hands of the apartheid state over the period of last 5-7 decades.
Well, Javed, when we look at the situation like that, once the hostages or the war criminals that they took away are given away, then what is going to happen? Because we are talking about the ceasefire, and the ceasefire is quite delicate at the moment. So do you think that they are going to be able to move on to the next steps? Because we're hearing so much statements from Israel sides that they are going to continue attacking if Hamas stays, and Hamas is not going anywhere. Under these circumstances, do you think once the leverage of the hostages is over, what is going to happen?
I think that is at the heart of the problem. Once the prisoners of war have been handed over, all of them are handed back to apartheid state, what is going to be the scope and the shape of the Israel's aggression onto the Gaza and onto the occupied West Bank? I think this is a bigger question. Israeli leaders have been saying time and again, the cabinet members of the Donald Trump have been saying time and again that the West Bank has to be occupied, has to be annexed by Israel. I think that seems to be a very clear agenda. Donald Trump just recently said that Egypt and Jordan must accept the all remaining population of Gaza. It should be sent to Egypt and Jordan. Jordan and Egypt has obviously refused to take the Gaza's population. So in that context, I think that needs to be seen in a broader context. Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, has been eyeing onto the northern Gaza. They believe that this is a beautiful site. They can build up more settlements, and then all these Palestinians should be expelled. And they comprehensively created very hostile conditions on the grounds. By and large, 90% Gaza has been destroyed so far as its health infrastructure is concerned, so far its residential and commercial infrastructure is concerned, so far its sewage and cleaning water system is concerned. The UN buildings have been destroyed, the UN operated schools have been destroyed. Nothing has left so far as nothing has left in terms of the means with which the life can be sustained. But nonetheless, before I come back to this very question, we have seen there have been jubilation on the part of the Palestinians. When they saw these demolition sites of their homes, they did not cry. They cried with happiness that at least they are back to the land they belong to. And they said, we would never, ever leave our land, no matter what Donald Trump says. Now, this is a bigger question, that those people who have lost their generations, their family members, they have lost their residence. The last part of anybody who can think of that need residence, they don't have any means to sustain their life, but they are saying that they would not leave Gaza. So this is a big setback right from the day one to the Donald Trump evangelical lobbies in the USA and the apartheid structure. So in that context, Palestinians are going nowhere. Palestinians are not mentally occupied. They are physically occupied. Mentally, I believe Palestinians are the only nation in the world which enjoys a real freedom so far as the composition of their mind is concerned. They have not accepted the occupation. The people outside Gaza, more particularly the Arab countries, the other Muslim countries, they are mentally occupied by Israel. It's their fear which has stopped them helping Palestinians. Instead of helping Palestinians, they opted behind the scene to help apartheid state. In Red Sea, there were attacks on the Israeli ships, on the Western ships. So what Saudi Arabia was doing, what other Arab countries were doing, they were providing a secret route for the transition to the trade supplies of Israel. This is their role.
Well,
this is their role. That is a very unfortunate scenario. And now I believe that Israel, they have a plan in place. Certainly they have a plan in place where they would continue to create condition whereby this ceasefire is somehow the other is revoked, and then on the West Bank, it's already an open secret. The more people they are releasing, the more people are being arrested in the West Bank. Hundreds of the people in West Bank have been arrested since Palestinians were released from the brutal prison of Israel. All I'm saying is that the entire Middle East is on the edge right from the day one. The question that you raised, that's very important. The very third phase when Israel is supposed to withdraw all of its troops from the Egyptian Gaza border and from the northern Gaza. That's extremely important. Will Israel do that? And if Israel breaches its ceasefire deal, that means there would be attacks from Hamas and other jihadi groups onto the Israeli forces. And then there could be resumption of the hostilities. And that will be, again, last point I want to make, that's a very, very critical part. The agenda of the Donald Trump is basically to resume Abraham Accord, through which UAE, Bahrain, countries in the northern Africa, and some of the other Muslim countries, they had normalized their diplomatic ties with the Israel. Now, that was the reason because of which Hamas opted to carry out military operation against apartheid state on October 7 last year. And that was the core reason, because that was a kind of the agenda where the two-state solution is not there. And Hamas was under compulsive condition to carry out military operation against Israel to basically prevent Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and other Muslim countries and Arab countries to normalize ties with Israel. Again, if Donald Trump goes for resumption of so-called Abraham Accord, then what happened on October 7, those kind of military operation by the jihadi group will keep on happening. Palestinians, they don't fear death. It's the other it is the other Muslims from outside Gaza and West Bank. They fear death. That is the resilience they have proven over the course of last 1.5 years.
Well, Javed, when you point the occupation of the mines by the Western allies of Israel like that, it makes one wonder about the reconstruction process of the Gaza, which is now turned into rubble. And we are expecting for the Western parties and Israel itself, because it destroyed the place, so it should put itself onto the situation that they are going to at least help the reconstruction, but it is not going to happen. So what would you say about the reconstruction of the Gaza? Because so many allies, as you mentioned, are mentally occupied by the stances of the Israel. And with that, are we going to be able to see the Gaza rise from the rubble?
Just a little clarification. Mentally occupation of the Muslims outside Gaza, outside West Bank, we are all mentally occupied by the apartheid state. We are mentally occupied by the West because we look at their marketing of the Western values, which is based on the hypocrisy. Western allies of the Israel, they have institutionalized hypocrisy in the diplomacy. Now, it will take years to begin with to basically remove the debris. So 80 to 90%, Gaza has already been destroyed. And just let me quote the words of Donald Trump. He said, oh, it's a demolition site. It could be possibly very beautiful site when there is a reconstruction. What he was short of saying was, he was basically want to have settlements in the northern Gaza. Now, in that context, I think there are initial estimates by the World Bank that does suggest that probably it requires more than 40 billion US dollars, 40 to 45 billion US dollars to reconstruct Gaza. But point is, when there is already a war machinery all the time is there to keep on destroying Gaza time and again, what is the point of the reconstruction if there has to be a war? This is the bigger question. Bigger question is how to prevent Israel to resume war onto Gaza and to stop it of what it has been doing with the occupied West Bank, because they've been carrying out drone strikes there. They've been killing people. They've been arresting hundreds of people. I think that is a bigger challenge. I don't foresee any immediate initiative where there is going to be some reconstruction activity. We have already seen that the Turkey and the other, more particularly Turkey and other countries, they've been sending all what is required to have some kind of makeshift arrangements whereby the life can be sustained in Gaza. That help is there. The aid has started trickling down in Gaza. That's a positive point. UN agencies have started functioning there. That is a positive point. But again, the fear looms large. What is going to happen when the third phase of the ceasefire is going to be over, when all prisoners of war, Israeli prisoners of war, are handed back to the apartheid state? What is going to happen? I think there is a possibility, if not frequent, but there would be unfrequent attacks onto Gaza, onto the West Bank, because they will continue to create conditions to force population in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and in Gaza to leave the region. That is the most unlikely to happen. A full-scale war could not deter Palestinians to leave their land. Even if Americans are there, Palestinians would prefer to die and lay down their life instead of leaving Gaza and West Bank. Americans are living in fool's paradise. The evangelical lobby is living in a fool's paradise. The apartheid state, the far right, and all their nonsensical rhetorics that we have been watching time and again, listening time and again, that they don't want Palestinians to live in West Bank and in Gaza. I think they are living in fool's paradise. Palestinians would never ever accept that. They have preferred to lay down their lives, but they did not accept the sovereignty of the apartheid state onto Gaza. That is something extraordinary. It is unprecedented in the human history, where such a large scale of genocide has taken place, where 4% population, either it has been killed or it has been maimed or disabled, wounded, but they have opted to stay glued to their land. That is an extraordinary phenomena. And more importantly, no war can be fought without the supplies of the weapons. Entire Gaza was surrounded by Israel and its allies, which they have not made public. Americans were there to help Israel. Nonetheless, Hamas and other jihadi groups, they sustained their fighting against the apartheid state. Now we have seen now we have seen that Gaza's health ministry is intact. They've been providing all statistics which are being used by the international media, which are being used by the UN, which are even used by the apartheid states in its internal communication. Publicly, they are not accepting these statistics. Their military is there. It is intact. We have seen that these prisoners of war, Israeli prisoners of war, are being handed over by Hamas military force. We have seen that Hamas police is there on the ground to prevent the chaos on the streets. So Israel has not been able to finish off an ideological organization known as Hamas. That is an extraordinary phenomena. And strategically speaking, it is the military defeat of the apartheid state. It has won in terms of killing people, in terms of conducting a genocide of the people, in terms of destroying Gaza, in terms of making it a demolition site. It has lost militarily. And more importantly, it has also lost the international narrative, which is there. Israel stands exposed. Now people bracket apartheid state Israel with the former African ethnic racial profiling, when the black population was forced to live under the white population, people now bracket Israel with that Hitler. Netanyahu and his far-right group is being bracketed with the Hitler. Nazism is now being bracketed with Zionism. The scale of the public awareness in the West, that has risen to a point where I think it is irreversible now. The governments in the West in future would not be able to continue with the liability of Israel. I think sooner or later, I think if there is even a resumption of war, in the long run, it's going to be the apartheid state which would lose.
Well, when you put it out like that, let's talk about the Trump administration as well. You have mentioned it out, but it is important to highlight it once again. I think the administration's announcement to clean out Gaza has sparking a significant debate, with the U.S. deploying additional troops to the Middle East due to increased violence between Israel and Hezbollah. How might this policy shift affect regional alliances and the ongoing peace process, in your opinion?
I think for a variety of reasons, the USA wants to keep that military deterrence in the Middle East. Partly, I think it's a Hamas. Partly, it's a Hezbollah. But largely, it is Iran. Because basically, both Israel and the USA, they will create conditions where maybe Iran would feel that there is a real threat of a war in the Middle East. There is a real threat that Israel will carry out attack on its nuclear installations, that there is a real threat that there may be regime change operation. That kind of optics could possibly be created, and that has already been created, partly because Iran has been militarily degraded, its armed wing, Hezbollah, has been militarily degraded, and it's a pro-Iran government in Syria has been dislodged. So Iranians are on the back foot. So in that context, I think USA wants to maintain a military deterrence in the Middle East to create that threat perception for the Iranians that they could be the next. I think my understanding of the situation is that the USA would not carry out attack on Iran. Actually, there could possibly be some airstrikes by the apartheid state on the nuclear installation of Iran. That possibility cannot be ruled out. But I think behind the scene, understanding over the last 1 decade to Donald Trump and his tactics and his behavior, it suggests that he would prefer a negotiated path with Iran. And Iran would not probably surrender its nuclear program. That is the most unlikely to happen. But Israel will, one part of his strategy is basically to keep Iran militarily, diplomatically, politically under pressure. That's the one part of the strategy. Other part of the strategy is to basically put a lot of pressure on Egypt, put a lot of pressure on the Jordan, and more particularly on Saudi Arabia, to normalize on Egypt and Jordan to the extent to accept Palestinian population. On Saudi Arabia to the extent that it needs to normalize ties, diplomatic ties with Israel, and then Pakistan would come under pressure. In the Pakistani context, I think Imran Khan, who at one point of time Donald Trump used to call him as his friend, I think he is not being released, and now we have not seen very clear vibes from the Washington that it will go out of the way to get him released from the jail on politically motivated charges. I think there are some reports which does suggest that perhaps behind the scene they are scared of Imran Khan, that he has some sort of Islamic credentials. He is a pro-Palestinian cause, and I think that is these are the fears of the evangelical lobbies in Washington, and that they, in one way or the other, under Ibrahim Accord, I think they would like to pressurize Pakistan along with Saudi Arabia to normalize diplomatic ties. This is terrible. This is not going to happen because in countries like Pakistan, there's a huge public resentment against the apartheid state, and in Saudi Arabia, I mean, if Saudi Arabia goes for the diplomatic recognition of Israel, that will backfire because of the fact that the Hijaz, which is the Holy Land, somehow the Saudi Arabia is perceived to be so-called custodian of the Holy Lands. I think its image would further shatter. It cannot afford it. So far as the Muslims all over the world is concerned, I think Saudi Arabia would lose a lot. Though Saudi leaders are MBS, he's simply desperate to normalize ties with Israel. Behind the scene, they've got all kind of relations with the apartheid state. But publicly, at this particular point of time, it's very difficult. Now, the problem is that Israel and the USA are giving nothing to the Muslim countries in return of normalizing ties with Israel. They are simply, they are trying to pressurize them to normalize ties with Israel, compromising on the two-state solution, compromising on the 1967's UN Security Council resolutions, which calls for the two-state solutions as per the borders which existed before 1967's Israel and Arab wars. Now, kind of the agenda that the apartheid states, particularly under Netanyahu, has been pursuing, that involves the expulsion of Palestinians from the West Bank and from Gaza to the Jordan and the Egypt, and normalizing ties with the Muslim countries. This is a nonsensical, irrational political agenda that Donald Trump has been pursuing. This is almost unlikely to happen.
Well, about the situation, also let's talk on the Hamas-Fatah restarting the talks in 2024, because this is yet another significant situation that we should highlight. Yet significant uncertainty over governance in the Palestinian territories continues. What are the prospects for Palestinian unity, in your opinion, and how could this affect negotiations with Israel moving forward?
Well, I think for Israel, basically the issue is not the Fatah government or Hamas. Essentially, they are pursuing the same agenda, somehow or the other, to keep these hostile conditions in Gaza and also in the West Bank, to force Palestinians to leave. Now, nonetheless, there have been negotiations in the past year where Hamas was willing, clearly willingly, they wanted that the other groups like Fatah, Islamic Jihad, all their leaders, they put their heads together, and they, by and large, they were very much close to form a government which is like a coalition government where all Palestinian groups and the leaders are together. But again, the challenge, yes, it is there that within the ranks and files of the Palestinian political groups, there's a lack of unity. The jihadi groups have long accused that Fatah government, so-called Palestinian Authority, that it has been hobnobbing with Israel. I mean, dozens of the people, I mean, more than a dozen, I would say, they have been killed, none other than by the Palestinian Authority in the occupied West Bank. And that's why it has been the Palestinian government, so-called authority, it has been at the heart of the allegation that behind the scene, it's pursuing the apartheid state Israel's agenda in the West Bank. Nonetheless, Israel is not willing to accept even Fatah government in Gaza right now. That is what the Americans want. That is what the Europeans want, that let the Fatah government, which is known to be thoroughly incompetent and thoroughly corrupt, led by an aging leader, that will it be able to run Gaza? That is the most unlikely scenario. Hamas has proven militarily, politically, socially, in terms of every aspect of the governance, that they are the best to govern Gaza. You see, as I pointed out early on, their police is intact, their military force is intact, their all administrative structure is intact, despite the bombing, despite the fact that the 80 to 90% of Gaza has been destroyed, because alternatively they built up another Gaza inside under the rebels in the tunnels, and I think that is intact. And symbolically, there is a greater possibility that in future, If US puts a lot of pressure on Netanyahu government, which I don't foresee happening, in that case, I think Hamas would be willing, in one way or the other, to go along with other jihadi groups and form a coalition government.
Well, Javed, thank you so much for this detailed answers. That was the situation that is unfolding inside the situation in the Palestine and Syria as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
The growing tide of anti-Israel sentiments. What you see behind me is just tip of the iceberg of what is happening in the country. More than half of $52 billion black CIA budget is spent on espionage network in Pakistan. How would you handle it?
The US has looked upon Pakistan as an ally at one point and then as an enemy at the same time.
That is going to be the first legal reason on the basis of which he is going to be instantly ousted by the Supreme Court of Pakistan.
Joining us live, Javed Rana, who's an expert on politics and geo-strategic issues.
In the world politics, which is not being driven by any moral principle, it is being driven by the hard geo-strategic realities. In a broader picture, more countries would aspire to have nuclear weapons.